She vanished without a word. 3 years later, she returned with bruises, a child, and a secret that broke him. Ryan Carter had everything a man could want by the age of 32. With dark hair, sharp blue eyes, and a calm confidence that disarmed most people, he ran one of the fastest growing tech companies in the country. The media called him ruthless, brilliant, unstoppable. But those who really knew him would say his heart had never been in the boardroom. His true self, the quiet boy from a small coastal town, was still hiding behind the million-dollar suits and powerful title. And the only person who had ever seen that version of him completely was Emily Torres. Emily had been his best friend since they were 5 years old. Their mothers were next-door neighbors who drank coffee on the porch and shared family recipes. While other kids argued and drifted apart, Ryan and Emily became inseparable. Summers were filled with scraped knees, shared popsicles, and secret hideouts by the lake. She was the brave one, the one who talked him into jumping from cliffs or sneaking into old barns. He was the steady one, always pulling her out of trouble, always watching her back. They had made a promise when they were 16, sitting under the stars with a blanket over their shoulders, that no matter what happened in life, they'd never lose each other. And for the longest time, they didn't. Through college applications, first heartbreaks, and awkward Thanksgiving dinners, they were always there. Ryan's career took off early, and Emily was his anchor, the person who never cared about the fame or the money, who still called him out when he was being too arrogant, and who brought him back to earth when the world started treating him like a god. But something shifted when Ryan's company went public. Investors demanded more of him, and his days became 20-hour marathons of meetings, travel, and phone calls. Emily tried to stay close, but he was always exhausted, always distracted. And then one day, she was just gone. Her apartment was empty, her number disconnected, and her social media wiped clean. He thought maybe she'd moved, maybe she'd met someone and wanted a clean break, but it didn't make sense. She would have told him. She had to. He called everyone they both knew. He even drove back to their hometown, hoping maybe she had returned to her roots. Her mother didn't answer the door. Her sister looked surprised to see him and told him that Emily was fine, but didn't want to be found. That sentence haunted him for years. Didn't want to be found. Why? Had he hurt her somehow? Did she think he abandoned her? Ryan threw himself deeper into work, determined to drown the ache that followed him like a shadow. No amount of success could silence the echo of her absence. Every time he heard her name, every time someone mentioned childhood memories, his chest tightened. The world thought he was heartless. In truth, his heart had left 3 years ago with a girl who never said goodbye. It was raining the morning Emily stepped into Ryan's office building. The glass skyscraper loomed above her, sharp and modern, a symbol of everything Ryan had built while she was gone. Her fingers tightened around the small hand she held as she stared up at the entrance. Her daughter, Lily, only 3 years old, looked up with wide blue eyes that mirrored someone Emily had once trusted more than anyone. She hadn't come here for closure or confrontation. She had come because she had no one left to turn to. Emily hadn't imagined she would see Ryan again like this. She had once pictured reunions filled with laughter or maybe even awkward apologies, but not this. Not the bruises still faint on her ribs. Not the fear that kept her awake every night. Not the urgency to protect her daughter from a man who had become a threat instead of a partner. Lily's father, Emily's ex, had begun to spiral in ways Emily hadn't anticipated. The kind words had turned to control, then to isolation, and finally into threats. He never physically hit her in front of Lily, but he made it clear that if she tried to leave, she would lose everything, including her child. When Emily had escaped, it wasn't in the middle of the night like in movies. It was a quiet departure on a Tuesday afternoon while her ex was at work. She took a duffel bag and Lily, and went as far as the borrowed gas in her tank could take her. For a week, she stayed in a women's shelter under a different name. She tried to apply for assistance, tried to find work, but everything led back to the same problem. She had no safety net. And worse, no legal support. Her ex had resources, a family name, and lawyers. She had nothing except a 3-year-old who depended on her for everything. In a moment of desperation, Emily made the call she had sworn she never would. She dialed the number she still remembered by heart. She didn't expect him to answer, but when he did, it felt like breathing after being underwater. She couldn't speak at first, only cried softly into the receiver. And he had said her name. Just her name. Like a whisper, like a memory brought back to life. She had hung up before saying more, but that single moment told her something important. He still cared. Now, standing at the reception desk of Carter Enterprises, she could barely steady her voice. The receptionist looked at her with mild curiosity until Emily quietly explained who she was and who she was here to see. The woman's expression shifted instantly, recognition dawning. Emily was led upstairs without any delay, as if Ryan had left specific instructions for years to expect her. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. Lily held on to her tighter, sensing the tension in her mother's body. When the elevator opened to the executive floor, Emily stepped out slowly. The halls were quiet, lined with sleek furniture and glass walls. Everything was polished, cold, and sterile. So different from the warm boy who once helped her paint her bedroom walls with glow-in-the-dark stars. She stopped at the large double doors at the end of the hall, her breath catching in her throat. Before she could knock, the doors opened. Ryan stood there, taller than she remembered, his face more defined, his expression unreadable. His dark hair was slightly tousled, like he'd run his hands through it 100 times that morning. And then his eyes dropped to Lily, who stood beside her mother, clinging to her leg. His entire body froze. For a full 3 seconds, neither of them spoke. It was the kind of silence that carried years of pain, questions, and unsaid words. Then, Lily did something unexpected. She looked up at him, blinked, and said, "Are you the nice man from Mommy's stories?" Ryan's lips parted, but no sound came out. Emily stepped forward, voice shaky but clear. "Ryan, we need help." Ryan didn't speak for several moments after Emily's words. His eyes were fixed on Lily, and something inside him was visibly shifting. There was confusion, recognition, maybe even guilt etched across his face. He had always been composed, even under pressure, but now he looked like a man whose entire world had been knocked sideways. Emily stood there in silence, her body tense, waiting for him to say something, to invite them in or ask questions or simply react. The silence stretched, not awkward but heavy, with all the weight of their shared past. Finally, he stepped aside and motioned for them to come in. Emily hesitated only a second before guiding Lily into the office. It hadn't changed much, though everything was bigger now. His desk, the windows, the view. He had moved up in the world, that much was obvious. The room was immaculate, yet sterile, in a way that spoke of long hours and little warmth. As Emily sat down across from his desk, Ryan remained standing, pacing slowly behind his chair, as if trying to gather his thoughts. Lily sat on her mother's lap quietly, her small hands twisting the edge of Emily's sleeve. The child could sense the tension, and her wide blue eyes flicked between the adults with quiet curiosity. Ryan finally broke the silence by asking how long Emily had been back. She replied honestly, explaining that she had only been in the city for a few days, and that she wouldn't have come to him if she hadn't been desperate. He didn't interrupt her, but she could see the storm behind his calm demeanor. She told him about the past 3 years in carefully chosen words, omitting certain painful details, but making it clear she and Lily had been through a lot. She described the man she had once trusted, who had slowly become controlling, paranoid, and threatening. She talked about the escape, the shelter, and how hard it had been to find work or stability with a child and no support system. Ryan listened without a word, but his expression darkened when she mentioned the threats her ex had made. When she explained that she had been too afraid to reach out sooner, not because she didn't trust him, but because she didn't want to drag him into her mess, Ryan finally sat down, staring directly at her. He asked the question she had dreaded most: why she had disappeared without a word. Emily took a breath, then told him the truth. Her ex hadn't just been manipulative. He had convinced her that Ryan was dangerous, that he would try to take Lily or ruin her life. At first, she didn't believe it, but over time, isolated and exhausted, she had begun to doubt herself. It had taken everything she had to leave and even more to come back. Ryan didn't speak for a long time after that. When he did, his voice was quiet but firm. He told her that if she had come to him back then, he would have done anything to help. That she had never been a burden, and Lily, his voice caught briefly, Lily looked just like someone he used to know. There was emotion in his voice that hadn't been there before, and Emily realized that this wasn't just about guilt or anger. This was grief. Grief for time lost, for memories that could have been made, for a friendship and maybe something more that had been broken. Then Lily spoke again, her voice soft and sweet. She asked if she could draw in his notebook. Ryan blinked, startled by her sudden question, and then gave her the pad of paper that was resting on the corner of his desk. She sat quietly, legs swinging, focused entirely on her drawing. Emily watched her daughter with a bittersweet expression, and Ryan watched them both. When Lily finished, she turned the notebook to show him. It was a scribbled drawing of 3 stick figures, a big one and 2 small ones. The big one had messy black hair and blue eyes. The 2 smaller ones had matching eyes. She pointed and said, "That's you, that's Mommy, and that's me." Ryan looked down at the drawing, then up at Emily, and something in his eyes softened in a way that words couldn't express. He reached out and gently took Lily's hand. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't promise anything. But he held on tightly, and in that simple gesture, Emily knew he had already made his decision. Ryan couldn't sleep that night. The image of Lily's face, the softness of her voice, and the way she had looked up at him as if she had known him all her life haunted his thoughts. His penthouse apartment, usually a place of silence and stillness, now felt uncomfortably quiet. He sat in his home office with a drink untouched beside him, flipping through old photographs on his phone, searching for answers in the past. There were pictures of him and Emily from years ago, smiling on beaches, bundled in winter coats, caught mid-laughter in coffee shops. He had missed so much. It wasn't just time that had been taken from him. It was the chance to be there for her and their daughter. The next morning, Ryan arrived at his office early, earlier than even his assistant. He had called in a few favors overnight, gathering information discreetly. If Emily's ex had been threatening her or trying to gain custody, Ryan wanted to be prepared. He didn't intend to sit back and let anyone hurt them again. He had the power and the resources now, and for once, he would use them for something personal, something that mattered more than quarterly earnings or stock reports. Emily, meanwhile, had found a small room in a friend's apartment on the other side of the city. It wasn't ideal, but it was warm, and Lily had a mattress on the floor covered in soft blankets and stuffed animals. Emily didn't tell Lily much about the man they had seen. She simply said his name was Ryan, and that he had once been her best friend. Lily, too young to understand the full weight of what had happened, seemed to accept that explanation. But she asked about him constantly, especially about the stories Emily had once told her. Stories of summer fairs, late-night drives, and a boy who had once chased fireflies with her until dawn. Emily didn't know how to feel. Being back in the city felt like stepping into a life that had belonged to someone else. She avoided old places, old friends, and the part of her that still hurt. She had survived the worst years of her life, but being strong every single day had drained her. Seeing Ryan again had been like opening a door she had forced shut a long time ago, and now the memories flooded back whether she wanted them to or not. Later that week, Ryan reached out. He didn't push. He simply sent a message asking if she and Lily would like to meet for lunch. Emily hesitated for hours before responding, eventually agreeing. They met at a quiet restaurant near the park, one Ryan had chosen for its privacy. He was already there when they arrived, seated at a table in the back with a high chair waiting. Lily ran up to him without fear, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Ryan smiled, and for the first time in years, Emily saw him truly relax. The conversation was hesitant at first. Emily was guarded, and Ryan chose his words carefully. He didn't ask for explanations or offer excuses. He just listened. Lily babbled in between bites of pasta, showing off her drawing of a princess with sparkles and a rocket ship. Ryan laughed, genuinely, and looked at her as if she were the most fascinating person he'd ever met. As the lunch went on, something shifted. They stopped feeling like two people with a painful past and started feeling like a strange, broken family trying to reconnect. When they stood to leave, Lily reached for both of their hands without thinking, and they walked out of the restaurant like that, side by side, her tiny arms linking them together. It was a small moment, but it changed everything. Ryan couldn't stop thinking about that moment outside the restaurant, when Lily had instinctively reached for both their hands. It had seemed like such a simple gesture, but for him, it was a quiet declaration of something deeper. For years, he had believed his life was complete, defined by success, meetings, power, and control. But now all of that felt shallow compared to what he had felt holding that little girl's hand. He had missed birthdays, first words, scraped knees, lullabies, and morning cartoons. He had missed being there, and no amount of business deals or private jets could ever make up for that. He found himself pulling away from work, unable to focus the way he used to. His assistant noticed the difference but said nothing. For once, the CEO wasn't consumed with quarterly reports or expansion strategies. He was making quiet calls to lawyers, setting up meetings with family therapists, reading books about reconnecting with children. He was trying to understand how to make room in his world for something real, something he had unknowingly lost and was desperate to regain. Emily, on the other hand, was cautious. That lunch had shaken something loose in her, and she didn't know whether to fight it or follow it. Part of her still remembered the night she left, the look on Ryan's face when she told him goodbye, the way she had felt when she stepped onto that train, with a child growing inside her and no one beside her. She had raised Lily alone. She had cried alone, struggled alone, celebrated every small milestone alone. It wasn't easy to suddenly accept that someone else wanted to step into a role he hadn't earned. But she also saw the way Ryan looked at Lily, the softness in his voice, the guilt that bled through even his silences. He wasn't the same man she had walked away from. They started spending more time together. Small things at first. A picnic in the park where Lily fed ducks and Ryan spilled juice on his shirt. A rainy afternoon at an indoor play center where Lily dragged Ryan through a maze of plastic tunnels, giggling as he tried to keep up. And then there were evenings when Emily would let him come over and read bedtime stories, his voice unfamiliar but comforting, as Lily slowly warmed to him more and more. One night, after Lily had fallen asleep with her arms around a stuffed giraffe, Emily and Ryan sat on the balcony in silence. The city lights flickered below them, and for a moment, it felt like no time had passed. Ryan spoke first. He told her about the years she had been gone, how he had thrown himself into his company, chased every distraction, and tried to forget the emptiness he couldn't explain. He told her how he had looked for her once, but when he couldn't find her, he convinced himself it had meant she didn't want to be found. Emily listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked at him, not with anger, but with a tired kind of understanding. She told him she had spent years trying to forgive him, not for his absence, but for the silence, for never asking why she left, for not fighting harder. But now, with Lily asleep inside and the city humming beneath them, she realized forgiveness had already begun the moment he stepped back into their lives. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, but it was something, a beginning perhaps, or a continuation of something that had been paused, but never fully broken. Ryan looked at her then, not as the friend he once knew or the woman he had lost, but as the mother of his child, the person who had endured so much and still stood in front of him, steady and real. He didn't say thank you. He didn't make promises. But in that moment, as he took her hand in his, neither of them pulled away. As autumn settled over the city, painting the trees with amber and gold, Ryan found himself drawn more and more into a life he had once never imagined for himself. His days no longer began with boardroom calls or ended with investor dinners. Instead, he woke up wondering what Lily would be excited about that day, what small detail of her world she would choose to share with him, and whether Emily would allow him to join them for another afternoon walk or story time. The shift in priorities wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. Even his colleagues noticed the difference. Ryan no longer stayed late at the office unless absolutely necessary. He no longer answered every call. His heart, it seemed, had finally found a new rhythm, and it had little to do with profit margins or stock prices. At first, Emily kept her guard up. She had seen too many promises shattered and too many men return out of guilt, only to disappear again when things got hard. But Ryan proved, day by day, that he wasn't trying to redeem himself out of obligation. He was there for the tantrums as well as the laughter, for the sleepless nights and the scraped knees, for the questions Lily asked about life and the dreams she told him when she didn't think he was listening. And it was clear, more than anything, that he adored their daughter with a sincerity Emily hadn't expected. Still, there were moments when her fear crept in. What if he got tired? What if the demands of his old world pulled him away again? One evening, they attended a fall festival together at Lily's preschool. Ryan had insisted on coming, saying he didn't want to miss any more of the small milestones. Emily had hesitated, unsure how it would feel to walk beside him in front of the other parents, to be seen as some sort of reunited family when so much remained uncertain between them. But when they arrived, Lily reached for both their hands, tugging them toward the pumpkin carving table as if the past had never divided them. Ryan knelt down and helped her scoop out seeds, his sleeves rolled up, and a streak of orange on his cheek. Emily watched from a few feet away, her arms crossed but her eyes soft. A woman standing nearby asked, "Your husband's great with her. She's lucky." Emily didn't correct her. Not because it was true yet, but because for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what the truth might one day become. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep in the car and Ryan carefully carried her up to Emily's apartment, they stood by the doorway longer than usual. The porch light flickered above them and the sound of distant traffic hummed in the background. Emily glanced at him, searching his face for any sign of uncertainty. But all she saw was quiet resolve. Ryan didn't ask to stay. He didn't push for more. He simply kissed Lily's forehead and whispered goodnight, then turned to Emily and thanked her, not just for letting him in, but for not turning him away forever. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a dramatic confession. but it was honest. And for the first time in years, it was enough. Ryan didn't expect forgiveness to come quickly, but he also didn't expect how deeply involved he would become in their everyday lives. The shift had started slowly. He offered to help pick Lily up from daycare when Emily had to work late. He started showing up with groceries and cooking dinner, even though he barely knew how to boil pasta. Emily watched him fumble with recipes and smile at Lily's endless chatter, and saw a version of him she never got to meet before. He was softer now, less polished, more present. It confused her at first. This man who had once chosen ambition over family was now content sitting on a kitchen floor, eating ice cream out of the tub with their daughter, and reading bedtime stories in silly voices that made Lily squeal with laughter. Their relationship was still complicated. Emily struggled with the memory of how he left, how he disappeared when she needed him most, and how much she had endured alone. Trust wasn't something she could switch on, just because he had returned. But with every consistent act, every hour spent not out of obligation but genuine care, the walls around her heart began to loosen. Ryan didn't pressure her. He didn't ask for answers. He simply showed up and kept showing up. And the more he did, the more Emily began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. One weekend they decided to take Lily to the zoo. It wasn't planned. Ryan had shown up early on a Saturday, hoping to take Lily for pancakes. But the morning sun was bright and Lily had been talking about giraffes all week. So they went, all three of them, like a family. Emily tried to keep her distance at first, walking slightly behind them. But Lily kept reaching for both their hands and laughing so loudly that it became impossible not to fall into rhythm together. Ryan bought her a stuffed giraffe, and when she held it up and declared it would sleep in her bed forever, something in Emily's chest cracked wide open. It wasn't the moment itself. It was the realization that Ryan was no longer a visitor in Lily's world. He was part of it now. They stopped for ice cream on the way home. Lily fell asleep in the back seat with chocolate on her chin and the giraffe in her arms. As Ryan parked in front of Emily's building, the car filled with the quiet kind of silence that feels full instead of empty. Emily turned to him, ready to say thank you, maybe even something more. But he reached out first and took her hand gently. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't make a speech. He just looked at her the way he used to before everything broke. And in that quiet exchange, Emily felt something shift again. Something deeper. Something hopeful. The evening ended like all the others. He walked them upstairs, tucked Lily in, and said goodnight. But as he stood at the door to leave, Emily surprised herself by asking him to stay for tea. Not because she needed his help, not because Lily asked, but because she wanted to. Because for the first time in years, she wanted to sit across from him and talk. Not about the past or what went wrong, but about who they were now and who they might still become. The months that followed were nothing like Emily had imagined when she first knocked on Ryan's door again. She had come to him broken and scared, with bruises on her arms and a trembling child in her hands, expecting at best a cold, distant form of charity. But what she received was something entirely different. Ryan didn't just step up financially. He stepped into their lives in a way that was consistent, quiet, and healing. What surprised Emily most wasn't how good he was with Lily, but how deeply he seemed to understand everything she didn't say out loud. He never asked for details about her ex, never demanded answers about why she never told him about their daughter. He just focused on showing up and being present. Lily, now a little more confident, flourished under their shared attention. She began to smile more, sleep better, and run into Ryan's arms when he came over. The nightmares stopped. She no longer asked why she didn't have a daddy like the other kids, because now she did. Her drawings changed too. Where there once were only pictures of her and her mommy, There were now 3 stick figures holding hands, often under a rainbow. Emily kept one of them on the fridge. Every time she looked at it, she remembered how far they had come. Ryan, meanwhile, began quietly rearranging his entire life. The boardrooms, the meetings, the endless travel, all of it started to shrink in importance. He learned how to say no to things he once considered non-negotiable. His assistant began to notice he was unavailable past 6 p.m. because he had someone to read bedtime stories to. At first, the change rattled people around him. Then, as his focus sharpened and his decisions grew clearer, they began to see that he was not abandoning success. He was redefining it. There were setbacks, too. Emily still had moments when she'd pull away, instinctively protecting herself from the possibility of being hurt again. She struggled with trust, not just in Ryan, but in the idea that love could be safe. Sometimes, in the middle of a peaceful evening, she would tense up when Ryan said something too kind, or when Lily clung to him as though he had always been there. But Ryan never flinched. He gave her space, never once using guilt or pressure as a tactic. He simply stayed, even when it was uncomfortable. One rainy night, when Lily was asleep and thunder echoed outside, Emily sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket while Ryan made tea. She looked at him as he poured the water. So ordinary, so domestic, and yet so incredibly rare for them. Something inside her cracked open. Without planning to, she began to speak. About the night she left. About how terrified she had been when she realized she was pregnant. About how her ex had slowly chipped away at her strength until she no longer recognized herself in the mirror. About how much she regretted not telling Ryan sooner. Her voice shook and her hands trembled, but Ryan didn't interrupt. He sat beside her, listened, and when she finally looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, he simply said, "Thank you for surviving. I'm so sorry I wasn't there." That moment didn't erase the past, but it redefined it. In that space between grief and grace, something new began to grow. Something rooted in honesty and watered with every small act of care they had given each other since reconnecting. 6 months later, Ryan asked Emily and Lily to move in with him. Not into his penthouse, but into a house he had bought near a quiet park. The kind of place where Lily could ride a bike and Emily could plant flowers if she wanted. There was no grand proposal, no champagne, no crowd. Just a quiet evening with homemade dinner, Lily laughing in the next room and Ryan gently asking, "Can we try building something real now?" Emily said yes, not just to the question, but to everything that came with it. The risk, the healing, the new beginning. And when they tucked Lily into bed that night and the little girl whispered, "I'm glad we're all together now," Emily and Ryan both realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that start again. The ending of this story brings a powerful and emotional resolution to a journey filled with pain, misunderstanding, and ultimately healing. Watching a man who once saw this woman only as a friend confront the consequences of her disappearance and reappearance with a child that carries both her burdens and a reflection of his own past adds an emotional weight that feels authentic and deeply human. What makes the ending so satisfying is not just the reunion, but the growth in each character. The CEO is no longer the emotionally blind friend. He becomes a protector, a father, and a man capable of love beyond himself. She, in turn, regains her strength, not by relying on him, but by allowing herself to be helped without shame. Their daughter becomes the bridge between their past and their new beginning. It's a story that reminds us that sometimes life takes people apart not to destroy them, but to give them the space to become who they need to be for each other.